Welcome to the Run Out. I am your host, Neil Barrett. Today's episode is a long one. I normally try to keep this in a sweet spot of about 30 minutes to an hour. A couple of times we've had a guest that went slightly over, and that was fine. But normally that's kind of my area where I feel pretty good about, giving you guys something worth listening to, but also not demanding too much of your time. But today's episode, we have Kyle Bennett. He is the founder and CEO of the Underground Sports Philadelphia podcast network, where he is also the host of several shows, including my personal favorite show, Streamer Season. And of course, as it relates to us here at the Runout, he is one of the co-hosts of the Outside the Box Lacrosse podcast, covering all things lacrosse, but specifically connected into Philadelphia. Kyle is a great dude, and we have a lot in common. So we ended up talking for about 2 hours on this recording, and then for another hour and a half or 2 hours after the recording. So there is a lot to get into. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, we are here with Kyle Bennett, the founder, CEO, and host of just about everything. Are you the host of everything now at this point?
I'm a host of now 4 shows that are year round, and then a seasonal show as well. And then I produce everything on the back end
of Underground Sports Philadelphia, a podcast network of 8 shows currently. Who knows what
the future holds. We're working on a 9th with a PLL Pro, so.
Oh,
that has nothing to do with lacrosse, which is also the
breaking news. Nothing to do with lacrosse is interesting.
Nothing to do with lacrosse, which is the funniest part, is when people see it. If we pull everything off, they're going to be like, "What?" And it's going to be amazing.
Sweet. I'm looking forward to that. So, before we get into the lacrosse that we're here to talk about, I have a bone to pick with you, sir.
Let's pick some bones.
And that is the return of Top Bins, the soccer specific podcast on the Underground Sports Philadelphia network. You and I'm totally blanking on his name.
Harrison.
Harrison. Y'all gotta stop talking about Manchester United like that.
Well, here's my thing. I'm coming from a completely unbiased perspective, because if you don't know, I am in the midst of selecting the fandom in the Premier League that I'll be rooting for. Harrison's a Chelsea fan, so I can't help you there. He's gonna spew the slander and everything. I'm just looking at it from a pure American sports fan and seeing okay, this team needs to start winning, otherwise they might be screwed. And boy, oh boy, did you guys save yourselves this past week against Liverpool.
The discussion about them being in a relegation battle was one of the things where I was like, they're not in a relegation battle. There's a very clear delineation between kind of the stage that they're at and everyone else kind of at that bottom. They're not that bad. They are bad. Don't get me wrong. They are bad. They are not in a good spot. Although I think a lot of that is relatively easily correctable. And I think they showed some of that in Liverpool this past 100%. Weekend. And so hopefully they can turn it around. But I did want to ask again, we'll get into the lacrosse. I know people probably are like, oh, we're talking about soccer again, but soccer is my I wouldn't say soccer is my number one sport. Manchester United is my number one team. Lacrosse is probably my number one sport just overall, but Manchester United is my number one team. So it's a big, anytime somebody wants to even briefly talk about soccer, I'm all over it. But I was wondering, you have the official announcement. You've announced your final 8, and you have the official announcement coming up on the 29th of January. And you have already eliminated Manchester City, thank God, and West Ham United.
Correct.
So you got 6 teams left, and I'm wondering, and you don't have to say the team, I'm not looking for a scoop or anything, but I was wondering if you're already starting to get a feeling for somebody. Are you starting to slant in a direction?
Neil, I'll give the run out a little exclusive here. The team's already selected.
Oh,
the team has been selected.
Okay.
So much so that multiple pieces of apparel and merchandise have already been delivered and are in my home.
So it's gonna be a full reveal.
Like, we are going to have like college signing day. I'm kicking it back to being a senior in high school. I have a fake like letter of intent printed out already that I will be signing, holding up. I'll have a jersey being held up. I'm going to do the whole hat popping circumstance type thing. But yeah, there is a team that has been selected, and it is fascinating too, being on a podcast that I have to wait another 2.5 weeks to really show fandom for when it's already been selected, and kind of like tiptoeing and dancing around, keeping the illusion up that there are still 6 teams in the running, but there's really already been a team picked.
Yeah, no, that's funny. I'm excited to see who you pick, and probably almost as much as that, one of my favorite things to do is learn about why people pick their fandoms. Because, man, I think that's like one of the more fascinating things. I used to tell people all the time, because I got really, really into it. I had been into it a little bit, but I got really into it in 2006. And I would have friends that would come over and watch games, and we'd be like, the real thing about it here is you have to have a rooting interest. Mm-hmm. I think it's a fun sport to watch, generally speaking, but it's a totally different thing when you have an active investment in what is taking place in the game, and that totally changes things. So
100%.
So again,
I've been such a big, like, I watch the World Cup every time it's on. I watch, like Team USA whenever they're playing, like, because there's an active rooting interest. And I think I compared my like selection process and like picking a team and what that's been like to the early stages of the PLL, where there was no city affiliation with the original 6, with the original 7, and kind of like trying to decide, how am I going to pick a team that has no affiliation to my Philly sports fandom whatsoever? How am I going to connect to these people and have a rooting interest in them? And early on, people know, if you're an OG Outside the Box podcast listener, like, I chose the Redwoods as my team, and they resonated with me a ton. Greg Gorenlian came on our podcast early on, so that also like cemented, like, cool, like, I like this team a lot. I have a great relationship with Nat St. Laurent. I have a great relationship with a bunch of guys on that team. But as soon as you go to city base and you put a team right in my backyard that also includes Philadelphia's son, Michael Sowers, I got to ride for my Philly boys. And it makes it a little easier too that the Redwoods are in the Western Conference. So like, I can still be a fan of them. I can still want them to have success. But at the end of the day, I want to see the city of Philadelphia succeed no matter what the sport is. And it's funny too, because like, obviously he's no longer the coach, but like Andy Towers was always good to us, and that Chaos roster has been great to us. And I want to see the Carolina Chaos have success. Like, if they win a championship ever, I'm going to be happy for them, because those dudes have supported us 100%. And that's the fun part, I think, about like the fandom and the media side of things with me being a host on OTB, is like, I am part of this like quote unquote like national media for the Premier Lacrosse League, but I'm also a fan when I'm not doing like the media side of things. But at the same time, I'm a fan of the league, so I want the guys who are going to treat me well and respect what I do. I respect what they do, and I want to see them succeed. But it's not like this old school like journalism thing that you see a ton more so when it comes to like Hall of Fame voting, and these journalists like having a disdain for people because they wouldn't give them an interview back in 1982 in the locker room because they're just trying to get home to their family. Like, I'm not that type of media person, but if you respect me, I'm going to respect you, and I want to see you go out there and score a hat trick against the team you're playing that week. And guess what? If you come on the podcast that week, you're getting the OTB bump, and we're going to root for you to have a successful weekend, no matter who you are. So it's one of those like fun like things to balance, where like, yes, I'm in the media, but I'm also a fan of the sport. I selected a team to be a fan of. There's a team in my backyard that I want to be successful. And it just so happens that a bunch of those guys on that team are really awesome dudes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have struggled with PLL fandom because, especially I think partially because of NCAA and just being such a fan of, like, you probably know I'm a huge Duke fan. So, like, I watch these dudes go to Duke, and then, you know, I enjoy them for 4 years, and then they come up to the pros and they're all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh crap, like, you know, who's going to be the team. I picked the Archers the day they released logos. I picked the Archers. I didn't even know who was going to be on the team yet. And then that team dropped, and, you know, Tom Schreiber. I mean, how do you dislike Tom Schreiber? And then
you can't, you know, plot twist. You can't.
Right. You know, trust me, I have no love for Princeton. No love. I would have loved to have seen, you know, Tom is one of those guys, kind of like Kyle Harrison. If you heard my interview with Kyle, you know, like, I didn't want to like Kyle because he went to Hop. He was constantly beating Duke. I was like, screw that guy. But you just watch him play, and he played the way that I wanted to, the way that I saw the game, because we both come from basketball. And Tom, and then off the field, he is who he is, like, mm-hmm. And Tom is that same way. I can't hate his game in any way. There's nothing about his game that I can dislike. And off the field, he's that dude. Like,
he's the nicest human being I've ever interacted with.
Right. So when the rosters dropped, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can rock with this. Like, that's good. And then they settled into cities, and I was like, oh crap. I have, like, the exact opposite, where them settling into cities kind of, I've basically lost my, like, individual team fandom, because the Archers are out in Utah. I now live in New Hampshire, so the closest team to me is the Cannons, but I don't really have a strong connection to them in any real meaningful way. I was never a Cannons fan in the MLL days. So that's kind of, I've been like, oh man, like, I don't know. And then I got really into when in that period between them saying we're going to home cities and them announcing where they were going to be, I got really into, okay, this is how I think it's going to work out. And the team that made the most sense, and even now still makes the most sense for me to have been in Carolina, was the Chrome. Now the Outlaws. They were built on Duke, number one. They even now have a large portion of players who either went to Duke or Carolina or High Point or some school there. You had Carolina Chrome. I mean, that just kind of worked. And I felt like Atlas in Denver makes way more sense, and Chaos in New York makes way more sense. More than half that roster is upstate New York players. Like, it just made so much sense to me. And so I got really into that idea. And then when that didn't happen, it just, like, you know, I got no hate for Chaos, but I just couldn't get on board with Chaos because my head canon had been destroyed. And that's stupid. I've recognized that's a stupid thing, but just in my head,
because you and I are both so MCU pilled that when something doesn't go our way that lines up with the timeline that we think is going to happen, our brain just melts.
Yeah. Well, and I think combining that with me being in New Hampshire and being kind of removed from Carolina, I didn't get to go to the games in Charlotte this year or anything. So that kind of all kind of worked in favor to kind of shoot my fandom down in kind of all aspects. And so I've just become kind of overall, I joke about it all the time, the Rob Lowe and the NFL hat meme. Like, almost all of my merch is PLL merch because I've just never, to be completely honest, even when I was an Archers fan, I still wasn't buying Archers merch and stuff. I felt excuse me, I bought a Tom Schreiber jersey and stuff. So like I did have some, but I a lot of it I just was PLL because I was just such a fan of the league and got probably more specifically players all across the board. Michael Sowers. Again, I say I didn't like Princeton, but even when he was at Princeton, I loved Michael Sowers. So when he came to Duke, I was like, yo, this is the best. This is the best thing ever. When we had Michael Sowers and Brennan O'Neill, I was like, oh man. And then it's hard for me to be like, oh, I'm this team's fan when Michael Sowers is over there and Brennan O'Neill is over there, and hell, I hate the Whipsnakes. They're probably the one team I don't like at all, but they got Brad Smith. They had Justin Guttard in, I'm like, man, come on. Like, how am I supposed to really hate these guys? So,
and I think that's what's so funny for me too, is like me coming into the sport, I have no connection to college lacrosse whatsoever. Like, I did not grow up watching lacrosse. I did not grow up watching college lacrosse. I didn't get into the sport until 2018 when the Philadelphia Wings were coming back to the NLL. And my buddy was like, yo, we should start a lacrosse podcast. This was like year one. We hadn't even been a year into starting like our podcast network. It wasn't even a network at that point. It was just our singular Philly sports show. And he was like, the Wings are coming back. I think this would be like a cool opportunity for us to like get in. And he played in high school and college. So it's like, I was like, if you take the lead, I'll follow. And then we end up going to the NLL draft that year. And it's so funny. I look back at that draft often and I'm like, I have a friendly relationship or a friendship with 80% of the guys that were drafted in that draft now. And looking back at that night, I'm like, I don't know who any of you are. So I'm just like, okay. And then like, I'm just like looking around. He's a teacher, so he had to leave early and the draft was in Philly. And I end up meeting the commissioner at the time, Nick Sikevich, and we end up doing our first episode of OTB at the NLL League office with Nick Sikevich. And from there, that's kind of where I was like, oh, I guess we got something.
So what is it about lacrosse? Because this was one of the things that I was wanting to talk to you about, was kind of your story and how you got into it. What was it about lacrosse that really captured you?
So when my buddy was like, yo, let's cover the Wings, I was like, sure, like whatever, like as long as you like kind of take the lead of like knowing the game, I'll be like your bouncing board on a show. And then funnily enough, like my parents, like Friday night date nights back in like the late 80s, early 90s was going to Wings games. Like they watched like the Chris Bates, Tony Resch, Philadelphia Wings as like their date nights. And my dad always jokes that like my mom was like always so intense, like banging on the glass, like hit him in his face, hit him in his face. So now it's like funny that like I'm credentialed media with the Wings, and like that's like one of their go-to date nights was that growing up. But then like I started, looking into the sport, and the Wings were coming back, and I was like, let's just shoot our shot and see if we can get credentialed. And I will forever be indebted to the Jackson family, Dana Jackson, Kyle Jackson, because Dana was working as PR at the time for the Wings. And I reached out to her. She invited me to Wingston, the Wings mascot like reveal, which was at the weirdest place ever. It is this like charter school in Philadelphia that has a turf field on the roof. And I was like, this feels kind of dangerous, because I look to my side and there's a window washer just right next to me. And I'm like, we're pretty high up. What if a ball goes in the road when you're playing like field hockey or soccer up here? So I'm at that reveal, and there's a bunch of like traditional Philly sports media there. And I'm like, I felt like Ricky Bobby. I was like, what do I do with my hands? Like, what am I doing here? So then I apply for credentials. We get approved. And I go to our credentials with me, my co-host at the time, Dom. And then we had linked up with two of the most phenomenal women in sports that I will ride or die for them forever. Brooke Destra, who was with us for a short time and now is doing fantastic stuff at NBC Sports Philadelphia, covering the Flyers and the Phillies. And then Alex McIntyre, who a lot of people know in the lacrosse world phenomenal photographer. She just put her camera in the rafters recently, doing the mom stuff and going back to school. But those two are like two of my best friends, and they were part of our early go, like covering the team and everything. We get approved for full season credentials, not even a year of us being a media outlet. And I was like, this is our foot in the door. Like, let's ride this thing. And then the first game I go and cover of that wing season, I was like, this sport rocks. Like, it's so fast paced. It's basketball meets hockey meets soccer, which I have varying degrees of knowledge of all three. And they get to fight and beat the hell out of each other too. And like, we're scoring, anywhere from 13 to 18 goals a game. Like, this is awesome. And then there's the more and more I like started following along, I was like, this sport rocks. And then the New England Black Wolves existed at the time, and I'll forever be indebted to that organization because the people who work there, I am still friends with to this day, and they're all working in sports at varying levels and different places now. But Tyler Brocious, who was running their social, who ended up working at the original iteration of the XFL when they came back, he's now head of social and content creation with the New York Islanders. We would do like our pick'em like graphics and everything, and we all picked against the Black Wolves one week. It was me, Dom, Brooke, Alex, a couple other people that we just had throwing picks. And it was like 7 people like picked against the Black Wolves. I don't even remember who they were playing. And I'm so pissed that when the Black Wolves moved to Albany, they deleted the Black Wolves Twitter account because there was so much like archived like banter between us and that account on there. And for whatever reason, when that game happened, I took a nap. Like, I was knocked out, and I wake up because I feel my phone just like buzzing on my side. And I was like, huh? And there's like over 100 notifications on Twitter. And I was like, what happened? Like, am I alive? Like, what's going on? And it was the New England Black Wolves official Twitter account quote tweeting our picks graphic, trolling us for picking against them, and every New England Black Wolves fan to ever exist just coming out of the woodwork and trolling us for not knowing ball. And that was like another like milestone for like people like recognizing the show. And from there it was like, let's go like balls to the wall and cover the NLL. And then we finished the NLL season, and it just lined up perfectly that summer was when the PLL was starting. And the fact that our show got to now attach itself to a brand new lacrosse league that we were kind of growing parallel to each other, and we're gonna, ride this thing. And it was like, okay, they're tour based. Let's see what the schedule looks like. Where can we go? And pretty much that summer, we committed to being like, if it's in a drivable distance, we're going to go to the game. We're going to have at least one member of our show at these games. And at the time, it ended up being the final season of the Arena Football League, and we had gotten credentials for the Philadelphia Soul. So we were doing Soul games in the summer too. And we were at a game, and Alex was with me, and I was like, we were like looking at weekends and stuff, and it was when the PLL was going to Atlanta the first time. And I was like, Atlanta's like kind of far, like looking at plane ticket prices, and it was super expensive. Like, it was summertime, like, and I was like, Alex, does Soul have a game too? Like, do we really want to? And Alex literally quote verbatim, Kyle, fuck the Soul. If we're boots on the ground in Atlanta and they see that we made an effort to come up there from Philly, from South Jersey to go to Atlanta, they're going to remember that more than the Philadelphia Soul are going to remember that we were at some rinky-dink game in the middle of the summer. And I was like, you know what? You're right. So we drove from South Jersey to Atlanta, drove from Atlanta back to South Jersey after the weekend, and it was truly one of the coolest weekends of my life. Like, being at the old Brave Stadium that is now, I forget which college football team,
Georgia State.
Yeah, they play there now. But like, being in that press box, like, you could tell like, oh, I'm right behind home plate of where the Braves used to play baseball. This is pretty cool. And then like we got credentialed every single weekend we applied for the PLL that summer, got credentialed for the championship game. And then from there, like, it was just like, all right, we've got something, we got a fan base. And then 2020 happened. And I think that for a lot of the lacrosse content creators was such a huge moment in time because the PLL had a bubble and it was happening at some of the most obscure times because they were in Utah. So like Lacrosse After Dark really blew up. That gained a huge following for a lot of people. Like I told you before, like we had guys calling in to the show from the bubble. So that helped a lot. And then 2021 rolled around and we just started applying for credentials again. Every weekend we applied for, we got approved. And then Baltimore weekend that year, I finally met Mike Rabel for the first time, like face to face. And he was like, yo, I love what you guys do. And I was like, we appreciate you so much. Like, we'd love to have you on the show sometime. He was like, shoot me an email. I'll CC like my, assistant, whatever on it, and we'll get it scheduled out. And then Mike came on the show. Oddly enough, the week before we were talking about like a lacrosse video game thing happening that everyone loves to talk about. And I'm like, guys, go listen to that episode and you'll find out that a lacrosse video game is nowhere close to being ready to come out. And then the next day, the PLL like mobile game dropped after Mike came on the show. So I was like, oh, he was, and it's so fun. We joke that like anything we talk about on OTB typically has like a 95% hit rate of happening. Like when we brought up for the longest time that Chrome needed like a Miami Vice type jersey. They needed a pink jersey with the teal. And then when they did the limited like run of like the third jerseys for every team that came out during the off season, there it was. And I was like, we talked about that. We brought that up on the pod. We brought up that the Cannons needed a red jersey. There's a red jersey right there. Like, so like we'll talk about stuff. And like this year I said the Outlaws need a rope hat with that skeleton crest logo on it, and boom, it dropped before the holidays. And I was like, they have people like ears to the wall listening to our show. Like, I'm convinced my studio is bugged by the PLL to get ideas in the best way possible. And it's like so cool to like see like that stuff happening. It might just be coincidence, but I genuinely think they have people listening to the show and listening to some of the ideas we have. And then it's just like grown and grown and grown from there. And then we have people, players, like league people, like all over the place, coaches just being like, yo, when am I coming back on the show? And that is like one of those, like, what are you talking about? Like, we want you on whenever. Like, why are you asking when am I? Like, we had RJ, I think it was Media Day 2023. He's like, when am I coming back on the show? It's been a while. I was like, dude, you can come on the pod whenever you want. Like, you're a homie.
Tell me when you can. Like, right. Like, hey, I'm on January 3rd.
Right. I'm like, you are one of the most busy humans and you're in a different city like every day. Like, you tell me what works for you. But we'll have players like banging down the door to be like, yo, when am I coming on? It's like, tell me your schedule and we will make it work. Like, I think we have like, I want to say like 8 guys backlogged of like who we're trying to like figure out schedules for to get them on like an actual episode. And then like the league is just like so accommodating to us, both leagues, honestly, and more so the Wings than the actual like NLL, because it's such a big league and there's so many like moving parts there. But like,
yeah, it's such a different dynamic between those two. Like, yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
And like working with teams in the NLL is a lot easier than working with the league, where the PLL, like they own the teams across the board. Yeah. So it's like easy to work with the league. And like any idea that I'm thinking or conjuring up, like I can shoot a text to somebody and be like, hey, we have this idea, wanted to run it by you. Is this possible? And within 48 hours, we'll have an answer. And 99% of the time it's a yes. And that 1% is like figuring out the semantics of it, and it's like, yeah, we'll make it happen. Like the fact that we've been able to do multiple live shows at PLL weekends is crazy to me.
Yeah,
like that is just like, who gave us the right to just like set up a whole thing here? And you know, it's always cool when those happen too, because it's one of those moments where you'll have the couple people who like recognize you, they recognize the like podcast logo on a sign that we have up. But then like 95% of the people have no idea who the hell you are. And I'm like, that's even cooler, because that gives me a barometer of like, we have so much more room to grow.
Yeah.
And we haven't even scratched the surface of like bringing in a majority fan base. And I think that's the cooler part, is like, we can still grow this thing 100x and not even be close to reaching every lacrosse fan. And I recognize we're not for everybody. There's podcasts out there that are more tailored to the lacrosse fan, you know, and what they want to consume from a lacrosse podcast. But the way I like look at us, and it's no direct comparison, I like to, because lacrosse is such a new sport too, I like to compare shows to like very big and like popular podcasts across the board. And like, I view like what Back of the Bird does. They're very much like Bussin' with the Boys to me. Like Dan Lomas and Paul Dawson give off big Taylor Lewan and Will Compton vibes, and their show is phenomenal. And, you know, the fact that they have Jonathan Donville, who I think is one of the most talented lacrosse minds out there, producing that show is amazing. And, you know, you have like the Teddy Jenners, and you have the Jake Elliott's, and you have Adam Levy, and all of these NLL minds who are kind of like the old guard. Like that's like the OG, like pioneers of podcasting to me when it comes to lacrosse. And then like, I look at us and like, we kind of just burst on the scene, and we've had different iterations. I've had different co-hosts, but like this run that has been myself and DJ, and then like us bringing in Chase, the PLL pipeline, to do stuff with us, and bringing in Brandon Hoot, and like, not to like toot our own horns a lot, but I'm like, dude, we have like a lacrosse part of my take like on our hands. Like, we're talking lacrosse. We're talking like stuff that's in like pop culture and relating it back to lacrosse. We're busting each other's balls. We're going at each other when our teams play each other. We're making bets, you know, against each other and stuff. And the dynamic of the show is just so natural, and RJ is responsible for that, because he's the one that got DJ on my radar in 2021 when he was in the vlog. And if DJ doesn't drive 16 hours to Boston in 2021, I don't know what happens to OTB.
Yeah. So I didn't know this. So DJ, you didn't know DJ is what we're saying?
I didn't know DJ until 2021 Boston weekend, when the vlog came out, and the clip of DJ in the stands at Gillette Stadium comes out, and he says, I drove 16 hours from Kalamazoo, Michigan to here. I was like, holy shit, that's like a cool story. Like, this dude's driving from Michigan to, you know, Massachusetts to go watch the PLL like opening weekend. Like, that'd be a fun like interview. And this was even before like we started really doing video podcasts. Like, I was still doing like phone interviews. So I slid in DJ's DMs, and I was like, let's get you on as like a guest. And the moment that he felt comfortable enough to bust my balls about me saying, so like, because in that video, if you watch it and you don't know, he, from like scrolling his Twitter, what his fandom is, he's wearing an Atlas jersey. He has another jersey draped over his shoulder. So I was like, so who's your favorite team? And he goes, I guess you didn't scroll my Twitter. I'm a diehard Redwoods fan. And I was like, I would have never guessed that. Number one, I didn't scroll your Twitter because I feel like that's a little like creepy for somebody I don't know. But the moment he had that comfortability just to rip that like first 5 minutes of that discussion, I was like, I like this guy. And then I was like, we'd love to have you on more. Like, and then from there, it was like, we just had like an instant chemistry. And I was like, dude, I've been in like co-host limbo. My co-host kind of screwed me over previously. Do you want to hop on? And for everybody listening, the co-host that screwed me over was not Dom. Dom and I still have a great relationship. I was at Dom's wedding last year. Like, he's the man. But I was like, I need a co-host. Like, would you want to do this? And he was like, dude, let's do it. And from there, the show has just like taken on a new life. And like, it was like, I didn't know what was going to happen with the show when I was like in that co-host limbo. Like, I had Adam Levy for 2 episodes filling in when I did not have anybody. And then Harrison was an intern of ours who was co-hosting with me a little bit. And then he had to like dial in on school. and kind of just like went off the grid until October of this year. And then DJ comes along and truly, like, without DJ, I don't know if OTB would exist right now.
Yeah, that's cool. I enjoy DJ. I enjoy you too. So like, it's cool. I didn't know that because I didn't find you guys until it's been a little while now, but it wasn't. It was well after DJ was involved. It's weird how that works. How like you're saying that idea of like, as well as we're doing, like there's still so much.
Right.
I had never heard of it, seen it. And it was probably, I guess, what would it have been? Probably somewhere in 2023, somewhere where like you first started like showing up in feeds, and I was getting more active on Twitter. So you were getting in there, and then we started doing, we did a couple of podcasts with other people.
Yeah.
Like I think maybe you were doing Dre's podcast or something.
Yeah. I think I hopped on one of his lives like during a PLL weekend that was like off the grid for both of us, and he had like a whole thing going on. I forget what that was, but yeah, I was in that. And then like we've done 3 like college draft like live streams that we've pulled in like different personality. Like Gorenlian's been on one with us. Hutton was on that one with us. Jared Newman came on for the entire draft, and I think that was when they drafted Will Bowen, and he FaceTimed Jack Rowlett during that, and Jack just answers the FaceTime like fist pumping, and I was like, oh, that's a Jack Rowlett pick if I've ever seen one. And then like last year we had a whole collection of people on, and we've gotten coaches to like call in after the draft too. So like Nat and Andy Towers the last 2 years called in after their ESPN obligations were done and like broke down everything for us. And I think one of the funniest clips from last year's draft stream was when Towers called in. We can't see his face because he's like on the phone just driving home to Connecticut, and the only person he can hear is DJ for some reason on the street. He can't hear me. He can't hear Brian. He can't hear Chase. All he can hear is DJ. So DJ asked the question because his computer was covered up with chaos stickers. And we were like, what is he covering up on that laptop? Like, it's Andy Towers. It can be anything. And then we find out it's high chew stickers. And it was the funniest thing ever. And then Towers tells us he listens to every episode while he's working out. And I was like, I love that we are motivating Andy Towers every morning when he's working out.
I think did you recently, probably with the Andy Towers again? Like,
yeah, I think I retweeted it again.
I just saw that. So as you're telling it, I'm like, wait, no, I just saw that. Yeah. No, that's pretty funny. Let's talk a little bit of like actual lacrosse here. Yeah. Obviously Philadelphia guy, big Wings fan. For those of you listening, we are recording before the week 7 games. This will come out after that. So y'all will probably already know how good or bad this conversation is. But I know this week you guys are taking on Calgary, which is, if I remember correctly, that is DJ's NLL team.
Yeah, so our episode of OTB will drop on Friday morning, I think. And it's funny how it all lined up. I let off the like I'm referring to this week as DJ's an op week. Because not only are the Wings playing Calgary, the Philadelphia Eagles are hosting the Green Bay Packers in the wild card round of the playoffs. And DJ, he's a Packers fan because Greg Jennings is DJ's cousin.
Oh, okay. I was going to say Michigan being a Packers fan, that seems weird, but that makes more sense. Okay.
So he's got the family ties there. So it is a big time rivalry weekend between the two of us. And he texted me on Monday and was like, just so you know, I hope you know, we got big beef this weekend, to which I responded, who's this? I was like, my phone detects when there's ops texting me. So yeah, we're playing the Roughnecks, a team that is very talented, but has some uncertainty in the back end for sure, with a young goaltender who I think has a bright future in the league, but to kind of be thrust into a situation with everything going on with Christian Del Bianco, friend of our show, and I hope everything works out for Christian and he gets to go to Vancouver and all this gets settled. But for Cam McLeod to kind of be thrust into a situation like that, I think he's done an admirable job so far. But how long does that magic kind of sustain for him? And, they've played some very good offenses this year. Calgary has. I don't know if that defense and Cam McLeod have enough to stop every angle of which the Philadelphia Wings can attack you at. And that's from an unbiased perspective because, I think you watch it every week. You see the Wings offense and where they can crush you, whether it be, those dirty goals on the inside with Blaze and Phil Caputo, or, you've got Mitch Jones launching one from outer space and it finds the back of the net going 120 miles an hour. And I think genuinely, even in a twilight portion of his career, Joe Resters is playing like MVP lacrosse right now, which is insane to think about. And then you've got the rookie of the year and Brennan O'Neill just laughing to the bank at every hater and doubter that he was not going to be able to translate to the NLL game, and is just doing things that I think Brennan O'Neill fans knew he was capable of, and all of the haters are absolutely sick.
I gotta say, huge Brennan O'Neill guy. Even I am surprised. I thought he would make it. I thought he could get to the level that he's playing at so far, and it's still relatively early. But I thought he could get to there. But I thought it might be more towards the back end of the season, maybe rolling into season 2 that you would start to see this. The fact that he's here now makes me be like, what's he going to look like? I tweeted out the other day, like, it's insane to think that he still doesn't get it yet. Like, he's still got ways to grow and improve. And I don't want to be the dude that's like, hey, box is there to make you better at field. Cause it's not. Box is his own thing. It's great. Like, that's great. But the things that I think he's missing in field that box will teach him. For 4 years at Duke, I watched him and I was like, man, if he can figure out his footwork, box is going to kill it, is going to teach him so much in footwork. If he can get slightly better at shooting, just in terms of an accuracy standpoint, the dude can rip. You saw that at the World Games last year. The dude can rip, but that just a little bit better at accuracy. Obviously, box is going to do. You have this little tiny goal and this big giant goalie. Like he's going to learn that. I think there's also a learning of maybe a little bit more body work in field. I think it's overstated how much of a kind of a bull dodger he is. I think people are really heavy handed with that. I don't think he does that as much as people think, but that is more when he's trying to be more physical, that is more of what you're going to get in field. Whereas I think box is going to teach him more to how to keep a guy on his back, how to manipulate the body instead of just kind of trying to get through them. And I just think, man, like again, as good as he was in the PLL, like he's still got so much room to grow. And that was a big reason why I was so high on him.
I think too, with him coming to the Wings is the best. And this is not my fandom show. Like, I love that Brendan is a Philadelphia athlete. Like, I love that I get to go to the Wells Fargo Center every home game and I get to watch Brendan O'Neill play lacrosse. But I think from an unbiased perspective, Philadelphia was the best possible place for him to go, simply because you look at the roster that was retained. And last year, anybody on that roster will tell you, they've told me directly, last year was an unmitigated disaster for the Wings. That is not where they expected themselves to be. I don't know what went on behind the scenes to make that season be what it was. But it was a disaster, and they have really fixed a lot of the problems, but they've kept that core intact. You see Blaze as the captain again. Mitch Jones, who they brought in from Vancouver a couple years ago, has been unbelievable here. I love that Mitch is here. Joe Resters, they signed in free agency. They bring a bunch of guys from Panther City who are veterans and have been in the playoffs. That veteran leadership around Brennan, for the first time in his lacrosse career outside of the World Games, he doesn't have to be the guy. At Duke, it was Brennan O'Neill in the spotlight. He's the guy. He's the go-to, he's going to be our closer. He's going to be the guy that carries us. with the Outlaws, a young team outside of the back end on defense. He's an offensive player who, until Eric Law got there, everyone on that roster was first year, second year, third year. Justin Anderson was the old man on campus, and he's only in his fourth season. Like, there's no real like veteran presence on that Outlaws team on the offensive end until Eric Law got there. For the first time in Brennan's career, he can just play loose and not have like the weight of being the 16-year-old on the cover of USA Lacrosse magazine. And that's why I tell everyone who may not be a lacrosse fan or truly understand like the ins and outs of it, I compare Brennan O'Neill a lot to Bryce Harper. That's my direct comparison, like athlete to athlete wise. Like, the world of expectation was on Bryce Harper. A 16-year-old on the cover of Sports Illustrated is insane. And, you're the number one pick. You go and you're the chosen one in a city and it doesn't work out. You end up going to another team and now you're taking your career to the next level in this next stage of your life. Brennan, same thing. Cover of USA Lacrosse magazine, has all this expectation coming out of a hotbed on Long Island. Goes to Duke, big time program in the college lacrosse world, has that expectation, that pressure, doesn't win, goes to the PLL number one overall, has to kind of be the guy on the team, becomes like an immediate face of the franchise, and then goes number one overall in the NLL, has all this doubt and all of this like, can he do it type of pressure. But then you see who's around him and the superstar talent and the success around him, along with a very successful coaching staff. And yes, Ian Rubel's in his first year as a head coach, but he's been the defensive coordinator for the Wings since they've come back. And he's brought in a Tracy Koleski, who is a wildly successful player and coach. He brings in guys that are going to help him be almost a Nick Sirianni in a sense, where he's got talented coordinators around him and he can kind of focus on being like a CEO type of head coach and manage the team and not have to worry about calling plays per se and things like that. And Brennan's just, you can see it. Like, he's playing so loose. He looks faster to me, which is awesome. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of players in the NLL right now who are not giving him the respect on the floor and kind of just saying, we're going to let Brennan O'Neill beat us. That's your first mistake. You've had 2 weeks now in 4 games that the Wings have played that Brennan O'Neill's been the rookie of the week. Yeah. Like, that is already a success, in my opinion, of Brennan O'Neill's young, early career in the NLL. And the fact that he doesn't have to be the guy, is playing this well already. What does that look like in March, in April, in May, when the Wings are trying to, go to the playoffs for the first time since 21-22 as a wild card team, and they just snuck in as a wild card team? They're trying to cement themselves as, one of the pristine clubs in the NLL. Brennan O'Neill is going to help them do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think people think, number one pick, the expectations, like you talked about the magazines. I had so many people tell me when he was at Duke, he's got to get that Mamba mentality, that Kobe thing. And I was like, there's only one Kobe Bryant. Like, that. Most people that play like Kobe played are considered assholes. Like, they're not team guys. First of all, they're not nearly as good, and they're not that you have to be liked in order to be good, but like, there's a difference between being respected and being liked. And, people don't get that respect most of the time. And I think Brennan O'Neill, I think he can be, I don't know that he is the best player on this Wings team. That's not what I'm trying to say, but people think that the best player on your team has to be like a Kobe Bryant, the guy that's taking all the shots. And like you have said, Brennan O'Neill is one of those dudes that I just don't think that's in his nature to be that Kobe Bryant kind of guy. It's just not who he is as a person. And there is a lot that I think, like you said, Jarvis Hateritz leading the league in points. Mitch Jones is technically third, but I'd argue he's second because he's played 2 less games than the guy in second place. Having those 2 guys, like you said, having a vet like Blaze in that front end, he doesn't have to be the pressure is not on his shoulders. Mm-hmm. Like you said, he can go out and play free, and you're seeing that is doing wonders for him. And like you said, I'm excited to see what growth comes out of that. One thing I did want to ask you about, just because you're a little bit more connected. They signed Michael Sowers. What are you hearing? Anything about his progress and any potential inclusion down the line?
So he is on the practice roster, which for anybody, it's kind of like the practice squad in football for anybody that doesn't really know how that works. So he is practicing with the team. From everything I have gathered from like Michael's Instagram stories, he's doing a ton of like agility training right now in Philly. I think every inclination and expectation is that he's going to be a part of the roster. And if somebody does go down with an injury, we could see Michael Sowers play for the Wings. He was at the game against the Desert Dogs for the home opener. He warmed up with the team and everything, was on the bench, got a great round of applause from the fans. I genuinely love that they traded for him, because not that I ever expected Michael Sowers to play, simply because of his height and because, more importantly, his history with concussions. That has terrified me when it comes to Michael Sowers and playing in the NLL. But as long as he can manage, and I compare it, like you look at some of the smaller guys that have success in the NLL, you look at like a Kyle Jackson, you look at like a Sam LeClaire, who are able to be shifty and use their size to their advantage. Michael can easily do that. And it's just a matter of putting him in the right position to do it. And I think him coming to Philadelphia is a smart move for him. And I think it's a smart move for the Wings too, not only on the floor if he ends up playing, but off the floor. I think the Wings are one of the teams in the NLL that do such a great connection with the community and the community outreach aspect that you want to see from a league like the NLL. There's teams you don't really see much of them going out in the community too much, whether that's just me not having it directly on my radar, or more so it's, hyper fixated for me with the Wings because they are in my backyard. Having Michael Sowers playing for two professional Philadelphia lacrosse teams, being from Philly, to bring him to the community, to go and talk to kids that, go to his schools that he went to. And it's like, I used to be in your seat. Like you can do this. I think is just infinite, just exposure and positivity for the franchise, for Michael as a player, and for Michael Sowers, the person. And I think it was such a smart move across the board. And not only that, he and Brennan have a great relationship. I've talked to people, they are very close. And I think that is also one of those things that DJ tries to shoot it down a lot, but I look at it from just the human element of lacrosse. And, Brennan is still extremely young. Like this time last year, he was getting ready to play his final year at Duke. Like he's in a new environment. He's living in Philly. I think he was living in Philly November, December. I forget if he's still there this month or not, but with his obligations at Duke, because of, I don't know,
that's what I was wondering.
He's working with Duke still. But to have the comfortable, like, I also thought it was super smart that the Wings brought in Dalton Young, a guy that Brennan has a great relationship with. Paul Day really likes Dalton Young's game. So I like that he's also on the practice squad, and you have guys that Brennan O'Neill is familiar with in a new environment, in a new city, that the only time he's really been in Philly full-fledged is playing in Final Fours at Lincoln Financial Field. I think it was a smart move for them to bring in guys that make Brennan feel comfortable, because at the end of the day, yes, you have the Joe Resetarits, you have the Blaze Reardons, you have Mitch Jones. Eventually, you're going to have to move on from those guys, whether it be age, whatever it may be. And, Blaze and Mitch are a little bit different than Joe. Joe's a little bit older than those guys. But at the end of the day, Brennan O'Neill is brought here as a number one pick. He's going to be the face of the franchise in, say, 4 or 5 years. And the more you make him comfortable, the more likely it is that Brennan continues to play in the NLL. There was a lot of speculation he wasn't going to play And
Yeah.
the Wings were, shooting a shot in the dark, picking him number 1 overall. And I was like, knowing my relationship with Paul Day and knowing how this organization operates, they would not be selecting somebody number 1 overall if they didn't have the slightest inclination that that player was going to commit to play. And I think the more comfortable that they have made Brennan, the smarter it's been for the organization, the better off it's going to be for Brennan in the long game. And I think if Michael Sowers ends up playing, that first night he's out on the floor, the roof of the Wells Fargo Center might blow off.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you. People have brought up his issues with concussions, but I tend to think that a lot of the big hits that you see are like you said, they're not hitting Kyle Jackson like that. He's too quick, and I see Sowers a lot like that. Like I think he can be relatively.
Look how successful he was in the Champ Series last year. Like,
yeah, right.
That's what Sowers can do when it comes to the NLL. And sure, it's a different type of goal and goalie situation, but look at where he was hitting shots from. Look at how easy it is for him to get up and down, the field like that. Michael Sowers has a basketball gene in his bag. Like he could be wildly successful at the game, and it's just a matter of managing, to handle concussions and things like that, which I think the Wings have one of the best medical teams out there. So I don't think it would be an overall issue, but it's definitely something you have to take into account when you're putting somebody out on an NLL floor who has that long history of concussions.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about you finding a Premier League team. I'm in the process of trying to hopefully, like we discussed with my PLL fandom, maybe I won't quite get there, but hopefully I'm trying to find that rooting interest. And I never thought it would be in fact, basically from the jump, I was like, well, it won't be the Wings. Cause I'm just not I have no issues with Philadelphia sport teams. Like I don't dislike them in any way. I just don't like them in any way either. Like they've just never been a part of anything. So I was like, well, it won't be the Wings. And now I'm like, it's like you guys are actively trying to recruit my fandom. Like, what could we do to possibly get Neil on board? Like, oh, we'll draft.
Well, Neil, if you're a big dog guy, I advise you to tune in to this week's Wings Calgary game, because it's Barking the Bull, and there's going to be a Wells Fargo Center filled with everyone's dogs that are going to be just absolutely adorable,
dogs.
barking every time Brennan scores a goal.
All right, so let's look outside of Philly. What are some things covering the NLL, especially for me? I'm trying to really get into it. I've never really it's never fully grasped me the way that the field game does. What are some things in the NLL that you are kind of keeping an eye on these days?
Yeah, the number one thing for me, and I've been on this train. DJ's been on this train, and the more and more people I tell about it, the more they start to kind of see the vision. I am genuinely of the belief that the face-off position matters so much more in the NLL than it does in the PLL. And not saying it doesn't matter in the PLL, it's just a different situation with the PLL right now. But the face-off position genuinely matters so much in the NLL. You look at the teams who are successful in the NLL over the past, I'll even say since I started covering the league in 2018, 2019, when the Wings drafted Trevor Baptiste, and seeing what Trevor was able to do at the faceoff dot, I was like, holy hell, like this is so important. Like getting possessions in games matters in this league. And the more and more it is evolved and transpired, you see Trevor go out to San Diego, you see in a non-traditional face-off sense, Jeremy Thompson, what he's able to do for the Georgia Swarm at the face-off dot is so impressive. Jay Thornbert for Ottawa has been unbelievable in his career at the face-off dot. Then you look at somebody like Joe Nardella, who comes in when the New England Black Wolves are at the tail end, and now he's with Albany, obviously, and what he's been able to do. Spectacular. Jake Withers in Halifax, TD picking up, the box game. And you see what the face-off position has done for guys like Connor Farrell going to Buffalo last year. I genuinely feel like it revitalized his career. and what he's going to be able to do as a professional lacrosse player. His style of faceoff fits the box game so much because he has that football background that I was like, he's going to thrive there. And there's no better place for Connor Farrell's personality than the Buffalo Bandits. And I genuinely think from the moment they signed him last year, it saved their season. I don't think the Buffalo Bandits end up going to the title game, the title series, without Connor Farrell. And he truly like picked them up from where they were. I thought they had the rare, we won a championship, but now we have championship hangover, not we lost a championship and have that lost the title game hangover. And they were almost playing like street lacrosse almost throughout a big portion of last year. And then it was like, we need a face-off guy. You know, Max Adler isn't walking through that door. And you look what Max did for them the year before. They won a title with Max Adler there, who was phenomenal for them. They signed Connor Farrell. It changed their offense because they were getting the ball for a Josh Byrne, for a Dane Smith, for Chase Frazier, for Ian McKay in transition. Like, it changed so much for them. And I'm looking at that right now for teams like Saskatchewan, and what your guy Jake Naso is doing for them.
I was going to say,
we said it on the show this week on OTB. It would be a crime if at the end of the season, if Jake continues to go on this trajectory, if your rookie of the year candidates are not Brennan O'Neill, Dyson Williams, and Jake Naso. Like, those are my top three right now with what they're doing. And I think Dyson's going to figure a lot out. He's still kind of getting his feet wet. And I thought that game against Vegas was a good stepping stone for him to really like showcasing what he's able to do. But like what Brendan's been able to do, what Jake has done at the faceoff dot is comparable to what Brendan is doing from a forward position. Like, he is doing things that in the history books of the NLL, only Jay Thornberry and Jake Withers and Trevor Baptiste have done. And that those are like unicorns at the faceoff dot. If Jake continues to do that, Saskatchewan's going to be in a fantastic spot with all of their young talent and getting possessions for, you know, a Josh Sawada, getting possessions for Zach Mans, for Robert Church when he comes back from injury, for Levi Anderson. Like, that is just invaluable. And I'm looking at like what Vancouver's doing, and I think it's going to help him in the field game even more. You know, Stathakis has taken faceoffs for Vancouver, and he's been fantastic for them. You look at, you know, what Rochester did last week. They finally bring in Mike Sisselberger, and they win in dominant fashion against one of the better teams in the early go of this season. And I likened Sis going to Rochester to Connor Farrell going to Buffalo. With Sis's wrestling background and that physicality, he was always going to thrive at the faceoff position no matter what, but especially in the NLL. I think it really gives him a leg up because he knows how to get low and can kind of really like grind out a faceoff battle in the NLL. And I think that could be something that propels Rochester to figuring things out. And, you know, they've got a home and home with Halifax the next 2 weeks. So we'll see Sis versus Jake Withers the next 2 weeks, which is going to be just like, get your popcorn ready at the faceoff stripe. Like, Jerry Raganese has to be like foaming at the mouth. But you look at the teams that don't have faceoff guys. You look at Las Vegas, who's throwing, you know, Kirsty out there at the stripe, who, if he gets possession, he's great in transition, but he's not a faceoff athlete. You know, he's not a guy that's going to win you a ton of faceoffs. You look right now with Toronto with TD out, they've been struggling a lot, and you know they have other reasons why they've been struggling. But and you look at Albany, and they're 1-4, but they have a positive goal differential. To me, it's like they're getting possessions. It's more their defense that's not anchoring down late in games for them to be on the winning side of these things, and they're losing 1-goal games. They could easily be 4-1. Joe Nardell has been fantastic for them. Their offense is getting possessions and scoring, and they're the only team with 1 or no wins that has a positive goal differential, which is just insane. And you look at Rochester, like they were 1-4 until they signed Sis, and now they look like they're finding a groove and getting a Connor Fields, getting a Ryan Smith, getting a Lanchberry, McConvey, and those boys' possessions. Faceoffs matter so much in the NLL, and when every team realizes that, that's when I think we are going to see the best version of the NLL, is when every team commits to having a face-off athlete. And that's the thing too, is you have to find the right guy who's not just like going to take a face-off and has to run off the floor. You need to be like Trevor Baptiste, who's able to win a face-off, run down the floor and score, or drop back on defense, just like Joe Nardella can, just like Jake Withers can. Like, if you have that in your bag, you can thrive and have an everyday roster spot in the NLL.
Yeah, which is ironic because you started the conversation with talking about Connor Farrell coming into the Bandits, and that was the big complaint against him, was that he was a fogo. And I was always of the opinion that a lot of that conversation was way overblown, because that offense that they had with the Chrome was so bad. He'd pick up the ball and he'd be running down, and nobody was moving. Nobody was trying to get open for him. And so, yeah, he'd get double teamed and lose the ball. And people be like, see, he sucks. He got a turnover. And it's like, yeah, but you're not paying attention to the whole rest of what's happening there. And I think it's interesting to see him succeeding, and specifically succeeding as not being a guy that has to get off the field in the NLL, where you'd say those margins are tighter, everything's smaller and everything. And
his football background like plays into that. Like, he was a linebacker playing football, and I think him being able to get back on defense and be a little physical and rough somebody up plays to his strengths.
Yeah, for sure. So, it's been interesting, especially I was watching with Sis going to Rochester this week, and how much that really seemed to like ignite them. And obviously we'll see how that goes forward. But yeah, it's interesting comparing the NLL's face-off situation versus the PLL's, where I don't want to say that face-offs don't matter, because obviously possession matters, but the importance of those possessions has clearly gone backwards since 2019 to now. It matters, I think, significantly less than it did. You talk about Greg. I've seen him talk about that 2019 rule set, when they created that rule set and the refs were calling it the way it was supposed to be. That was the best the face-offs ever were. They were important without being lopsidedly important, like it often is in NCAA, where if you have a guy winning 60% of the face-offs in NCAA, you're almost unbeatable. And so maybe that was too much in one direction, and I felt like the PLO was in a really good place. And then I know Greg has his whole list of complaints about they've changed rules, they've stopped calling the rule book as it's written. He has his complaints, and I tend to agree with him, and it feels like I've been frustrated with the face-offs in the PLL, where they just don't seem to be important, and as important as they were originally. When a guy like Trevor can win 70% of the faceoffs, and they lose, and not just lose by, they'll lose by 5 goals, and it's because of other things. It's like, man, what are we doing here? I did a stat. I think it was the first year they had the major change that everyone complained about. So whatever that was, 2022, 23, one of those years. And it was, if your face-off guy won 65% of his face-offs, those teams were, I think it was like 3-15. And the 3 wins were all the Utah Arch. Well, they weren't the Utah Archers then, they were just the Archers. But the 3 wins were the Archers, and they were by far the most efficient win. Everyone else that had a guy go over 65% lost the game. And then you want to be like, oh, well, face-offs are really important. And it's like, I mean, clearly they're not. I mean, I don't want to see, again, they weren't the Philly Waterdogs at the time, so excuse me, but I don't want to see what the Waterdogs got known for, of just basically standing up and being like, take the ball, now I'm going to try and take it off of you. Like, I didn't want to see that, but I completely understood why they did that, because of the value of the face-off had been diminished. So all that to say, it is interesting to see how important it is in the NLL. Conversely, It's a little easy. It's a little early. I mean, to be talking too much PLL, but I did have two things that I wanted to ask you about. First was the championship. The championship series is, I believe, it's 3 weeks away from recording. Yeah, crazy. Your Waterdogs aren't in it, but the rosters were released early this week, I think it was, or maybe the end of last week. What are you seeing from there? What are you kind of looking at and maybe predicting?
Yeah, I love that it's like the Archers versus the world, because it's 3 Eastern Conference teams and then the Archers are the lone Western Conference team. I love that we have the defending championship series champions in the Cannons and the defending regular season PLL champions in the Archers in this year again. I love that the Archers continue their streak. They're the only team that's qualified for every championship series in existence, which I think is a really cool like nod to them and like how good they are year over year as a roster.
Yeah.
And I had like some Mandela effect things when I saw the PLL posted like the newcomers to the championship series, and I was like, Miles Jones has never played in the champs. I was like, I swear. And then I was like, oh wait, he got traded from the Redwoods to the Atlas the year the Redwoods were like going to the champ series. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. I'm very excited for Miles. I think his game is going to be so sick in the champ series. And I like that there's a lot of guys that we have seen in the champ series back just on different teams. So you have Dylan Malloy, who was on that Chrome team that won the first year. He's back with the Atlas. Colin Heacock was on that Chrome team. He's back with the Whips. I also, and I brought this up on OTB this week, I think it's fascinating that Matt Rambo's playing, because earlier in the PLL season, he said like sixes is a young man's game, and not that Matt Rambo is old by any sense of the definition, but I never expected to see, after Rambo decided to walk away from the NLL, his rights are still owned by the Wings, but he's coaching in Florida, and that's kind of just the avenue he's gone. So I never expected him to play in the Champ Series, because it, in my opinion, didn't really fit his game stylistically. But I'm excited that he's taking on this opportunity, and I view it more so as the Whipsnakes have gone through a lot of changes offensively over the past 2 seasons, and now Zed Williams is gone. They had Will Manny there for a year. I think Rambo is using this opportunity. I think it's smart by him. He and TJ Malone have a great relationship on the field and off the field, and TJ's playing in this, which is going to be so much fun. But I think Rambo's using this as a leader on that Whipsnakes team to build chemistry with a lot of these young guys that will be playing for the Whipsnakes in the regular season. Like, he had less than half a season with Ryan Conrad. I think this is going to be a great opportunity for those two to kind of find a connection with each other. You look at somebody like a Roman Puglisi, who really started to find his footing in the PLL this past year. I think this is going to be a great opportunity for Rambo as a leader on this Whipsnakes team to connect with him, whether it be on the field or just off the field, and having that team camaraderie, that team bonding throughout the whole week. You look at somebody like a Wheaton Jacobus, you look at Brad Smith coming back, who hasn't played in forever. I think this is such a smart move by Matt Rambo, and I may be overthinking this, and Matt Rambo is just doing this so he can spend an entire week in a hotel room with Colin Heacock and they can just be buddies all week like they were in college.
Yeah, relive Maryland days.
Might be the case, but I think Rambo is doing this as a leader on this Whipsnakes team now, and as kind of the veteran presence there to be like, let me connect with a lot of these young guys who I'm probably going to see throughout the regular season on a roster with me game day, and build chemistry with them in a situation that's going to help improve my game at the same time. Yeah.
Two things that you kind of hit on. First, I'm right there with you on Miles Jones. I did the exact same thing. Wait, he's never done it. And then I was thinking, no, I don't think I've ever seen him play it. And then I did the same thing. Oh yeah, he flipped. But I, like you said, I fully expect him to be very good. And the only thing I'm slightly worried about with him is that conditioning that this game requires of getting up and down the field. He's a little bit older now, just does he have that in him? But if if he has that, then I think this game is so perfectly suited for him. Having no poles, he's gonna get to the goal all the time, and then if you try and stop him there, he's just gonna pull up and shoot, and nobody wants to see that dude shooting at them. So
Miles Jones is going to be yelling for his stickers again, because Miles Jones being able to shoot twos from 13 yards out is going to be scary for these goalies.
Yes, without poles trying to close him out. I mean, he's going to do that, and then he's going to bully you and get to the goal. And I think I'm right there with you. That was my first thought, and then the second one was kind of looking over the rosters and. So like you're saying that Whip Snakes roster was interesting to me because like you're talking about with Rambo and him being there, I thought it was really weird that Matt Brandow wasn't on this roster because that seemed like such a good thing to do, exactly what you're talking about. Get some reps with Rambo, with TJ Malone, Ryan Conrad and those guys and going ahead and starting that transition to seeing what they're going to be like on the field this summer. So that was puzzling to me. And especially because to me on paper, this Whip Snakes team looks a lot like last year's Whip Snakes Championship Series team. Again, on paper, they look very outmatched compared to what the other three rosters are bringing. That it looks like you can make an argument for each of the other three teams to win it. And then there's kind of a sizable gap in this Whip Snakes roster. Now, I'm not putting anything past Stags.
Yeah.
If they show up at the championship series and just obliterate people, I think we'll be surprised is the thing, looking at what they're bringing.
And I'll always remember in 2023, the first year of the Champ Series, when the Whip Snakes were there, Stags could not go an entire press conference without talking about how much he missed Michael Earhart in particular, which I'm shocked he didn't try to get Michael Earhart to be his assistant coach. No slight to PT Richie. Stags, I brought this up on OTB too. It's funny. I said, I want somebody to love me as much as Jim Stagnita loves Michael Earhart. If it's not that, I don't want it. But I'm also surprised that, a lot of people weren't reacting the way I did when I saw Jack Corus on that roster. Stags loves Jack Corus, but Stags also, like I said, misses Michael Earhart, and he doesn't like having a non-traditional defense to coach. Yeah. He loves having his defensive unit out there, and that was like the one thing that stuck out to me is like, I joked, I was like, Stags is going to try to finish 5th every PLL season so that he doesn't have to coach in the Champ Series ever again. Yeah. But Jack Corus is the guy that I am really excited for on that roster, because Stags really brought him up a lot throughout the PLL season last year of being a guy that they really like. They like his game. I think Jack's game translates really well to sixes, and I think it's going to be a huge like audition moment for him to be like a regular on that roster for the Whip Snakes during the summer. And I think this is a huge Champ Series for guys like Roman Puglisi, like Wheat and Jacobois, who are, Roman's been more of a fixture week in and week out on that roster, but Wheaton's a guy who's in and out of the roster. He's been teetering on, is he going to get dropped? Is he going to get claimed by somebody else? I think this is a huge like Champ Series for those guys. And that's why I love the Champ Series so much. Like from the moment that they announced it, I was like, this is a chance for guys to do one of three things: elevate their talent level on their current team if they are a superstar and showcase what they have in their bag in a different format of lacrosse. Number two, it can get guys who have not been on a PLL roster, and we have seen that both years, give them a chance to showcase their talents and get signed to a PLL roster. See Ronan Jacoby. And then it's also going to give guys who are teetering on the outside of their current roster and either build faith and build camaraderie with that current team, or the other teams that are there, or the teams that didn't make it, to be like, I like what that guy brings to the table. He fits our system. Let's bring him in. And I think it's so valuable for the PLL. And I'll tell everyone right now, we had Matt DeLuca on the show in the summer, and he was the goalie for the Waterdogs in the Champ Series last year. He loved every minute of it, and he said every team that was there last year was getting texts from guys from the teams that were not there saying, holy shit, I'm so pissed we're not playing in this. These guys want to play in the championship series. It's going into year 3, but this means something to a lot of these guys. And I think you saw that on full display last year too, when Kieran McArdle threw the golden stick into the stands and didn't give a shit about it. He wanted to win the whole thing for a multitude of reasons, but it matters. And I likened it. This was even before I was like getting invested in soccer, but like I liken the Champ Series a lot to Champions League, where like you have to qualify for this. You have to be an elite team in the regular season of the PLL to make sure that you're at Champ Series. And now it's another trophy that you're competing for. And guess what, guys? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the trophy is. It doesn't matter what the banner is. Those things fly forever. And you're telling me, you know, the Cannons aren't boasting and bragging about winning that championship series last year. I see posts from the Boston Battery fan group, who I love those boys. They do a great job. They're always posting about how they won the Champ Series. They bring it up to me every single time I see them that they beat the Philadelphia Waterdogs in the Champ Series. You're telling me that now, you know, RIP to Chrome, but, you know, the Outlaws, those boys, they loved every second of that first championship series. And it's just grown and evolved to a point in such a short amount of time that winning that championship series trophy means a lot to these guys. And it's going to be awesome to see it on the women's side too this year. And I can't wait for those rosters to drop.
Yeah. No, unfortunately there's not a ton to really talk about. So I didn't even have it as a talking point. Cause like you said, rosters haven't dropped. We don't know too much about what's going on other than the fact that it's going to take place, but I am excited to see the women's game.
I think we only know one team that has multiple players because she posted it on her Instagram story, and I tweeted it, that Lizzie Colson is more than likely playing for Maryland.
Right. And then we know the captain is
Alex Ostholman.
Yes. I kept wanting to say Ali Mashroney, and I was like, that I know that's not right. But yes, so we know they have 2 players. That's it.
Yeah.
Do you have any prediction looking at the rosters on who you think it can win it or will win it?
I really want to see the Archers do it. It would be really cool to see a team win a regular season championship and then win the Champ Series, be the first team to do that. And I just really love their roster. Like looking at their roster top to bottom, they have the most full-fledged team chemistry experience of all the teams out there. And yes, the Cannons have it as well, but they also have some new faces on that roster. They have some guys who haven't played with some of these guys before. But you look at this Archers roster of Grant Ament, Ryan Ambler, Mac O'Keefe is making his debut. You're telling me Mac O'Keefe is going to get to launch 2-pointers from 13 yards as well? Like Miles Jones is going to be, Mac O'Keefe can launch from wherever and it's going to go in. I'm so pumped for him. Plus his NLL experience is going to be on full display in this Champ Series, which I think a lot of people are kind of like forgetting that Mac O'Keefe has NLL experience and he's been very good when he's played in the NLL. Ryan Oghaven, Cole Williams, who I think is one of the most underrated players just in pro field lacrosse right now and just doesn't get a fair shot at playing. Obviously, he got injured last year, so that kind of derailed him being able to play in the regular season for the Archers, but I love his game. He's big, he's strong, and I am so excited to watch Bo Pettersson play in sixes because of the success that Piper Bond and Connor Marr have had as short stick D middies in the sixes format. Bo has kind of been like taken under their wing, and Bo was great in the regular season last year. I think this is so tailored to his game. He's going to be phenomenal. I think Mason Woodward's going to be unbelievable. Jack Van Overbeek, I think this is tailored to his skill sets. And I just think the guys that are going to be on the field for them, top to bottom, are hands down like the best roster construction. And I'm excited to watch Nick Washuta again because I think he doesn't get enough limelight, obviously, because Brett Dobson's on that roster, but Nick Washuta was fantastic in his appearances in Champ Series the last 2 years.
Mhm.
And I have a great relationship with Chris Bates too. I have a great relationship with all the coaches that are in this year. But I love seeing Bates get fired up, and when he wins, he is just like the inner Philadelphian comes out in him, and it's just so much fun to watch. But I do think the inevitable championship could end up being Cannons Archers, which would be a lot of fun because you'd have the Champ Series champions defending, the regular season champs defending. Who's going to win it there? But I think those two teams, top to bottom, have the best roster construction. And not that the Atlas are poorly constructed whatsoever. I'm just excited to kind of see how they all mesh together. You know, Miles playing for the first time, Ronan playing on this team for the first time in sixes. You know, Dylan Malloy getting back at it. Let's see how well he performs. I do think Xander Dixon has a chance to win the Golden Stick, though.
Yeah, especially with Connor Schellenberger also out there feeding him. Yeah, I can absolutely see that happening. It's hard. It's weird to say this as, you know, a largely still an Archers fan. You may have swayed me with your argument. I'm probably still, but I was definitely much heavier leaning towards Cannons. I thought the Cannons, you know, they won it last year. They have a lot of the same guys back. They added Will Manny. You know, like like I said, I think I'm still slightly leaning towards them. But you made a pretty strong case and have probably moved that needle back more towards the Archers. And I'm with you. I think that final pairing would be incredible.
And I think too, with the Cannons, I may be looking way too into it. It's pretty interesting. The guy that won the whole thing for him is not on the roster this year.
Who's that? I don't have it up in front of me.
No Matt Cavanaugh on the Cannons roster.
Oh, okay. I don't guess that I really noticed that, but something tells me, and I have zero insider information. You probably have more than I do, and I'm not saying you know, but something about that what's happening with the Cannons right now makes me feel like he's, if not on the team this year, he's going to be taking more and more of a backseat kind of role. I
agree. And I have no inside information either, but that's just kind of like what it looks like from a outside looking in perspective. I'm also wondering, like, if they're trying to just position themselves to get a younger, crisper Cav.
I mean, possibly, although I would say getting rid of Pat Cavanaugh and pushing Matt Cavanaugh out the door is probably not the best way to go about.
There's only room for one Cavanaugh at a time.
We can only do one. I don't know that that's the best way to ingratiate yourself to the Cavanaughs, but you know, either way, that actually is kind of a perfect transition to the other PLL thing that I wanted to talk about. And that's the draft, and more specifically what your Philadelphia Waterdogs are looking to do with their draft overall. But obviously the big important question is that number one pick and what you see. I know we talked about NCAA wasn't a huge thing for you, though. I want to get you on a team this year. We need to do an OTB team of the.
We're planning some things to, like, not necessarily give me like a fandom, but get more intertwined with the college game for me, and like figuring out how we want to approach talking about the college game, because DJ and I have talked about it. Like, when we've brought it up on the show, a lot of it has just like translated into DJ kind of just doing a rundown of box scores and like upcoming games. And it's like, I don't think the listeners tune in for that. Like, they don't want to hear either of us run down like, oh, this team beat this team, and go through the entire zeitgeist of college lacrosse from D1 to D3. So we're fine tuning like our college coverage. And it's funny, the only credential we've ever been denied for, and at this point I've kind of just like brush them off and I don't even apply, because it's a lot more fun to just sit in the stands and get the reaction. It is the college Final Four. We've never been credentialed for it. They've denied us every single time we've applied, which is just hilarious to me. And at the end of the day, we're more forte towards the pro game anyway. So we just go and we buy our $2 tickets for the D2 and D3 doubleheader game. And then we pay like $12 to go and watch the championship. And it's a lot more fun. But we're working on a fun project that I think is either going to happen this year or we're going to set the framework for it this year. And it's a lot of influence from what Bussin' with the Boys do with their college tours and kind of like going around and, you know, hanging out with teams and stuff. We want to kind of do something similar to that, and we're figuring out the best way to do it. But I do think my knowledge with the college game is a lot from like the big teams that make the tournament and everything. And obviously it's fun that the Waterdogs have the number one pick, and I'll have to do some research and backtrack. I don't know the last time an NLL team and a PLL team in the same city had the number one overall pick.
Oh, I didn't even,
because that will be the case.
I didn't even put that together. Yeah, you're right. That's interesting. And yeah, I don't know, even if you went back to MLL days, I don't know if that's ever happened, and if it did win,
and like what teams overlapped having both at the same time. So that's something I definitely want to like look into and see when's the last time that's happened, if it's ever happened at all. But I am fully ready to embrace the Cursed family. Not that I haven't already. I think they are a phenomenal group of humans. They're from New Jersey, which is awesome. And I'm fully ready to have a Curse on a team that I have fandom allegiance to and love and support for. I think CJ is going to fit in perfectly with the Waterdogs. I think it would be a mistake for the Waterdogs to not draft him, simply because you look at the roster and yes, they traded for Zed. Yes, Kieran McCardle was signed through 2026. And if you don't know me, Kieran McCardle is my guy. I have banged the drum for Kieran for as long as I can remember as being the most underappreciated, like future first ballot Hall of Fame lacrosse player we've ever seen. At the end of the day, Kieran will admit it. He's getting older. You got to see how many more years he's going to commit to playing. And I'm happy that he's signed, for at least the next 2 seasons. And I think CJ just fits in seamlessly, and you can have a team with CJ Curse, Zed Williams, Kieran McCardle, Michael Sowers, Ethan Walker, Jack Hanna. Like, who wouldn't sign up for that? Like, that's like an embarrassment of riches. And at the end of the day, my only question is Dylan Sheridan, Bill Tierney. And that's no slight to what they've done in their coaching careers, but to say they made the best first impression as coaches from a head coach and from an offensive coordinator perspective in year one of taking over a team that came in as an expansion team, and from the first full regular season they had until now, we're becoming like a model franchise of what a PLL team should look like. And then for them to go so drastically down after being a Tom Schreiber goal away and a Brett Dobson unbelievable, save away from going back to back as champions, something like didn't add up to me. And I was worried for what was to come with the team. But then that final press conference that Jake Richard and Matt DeLuca were in, and seeing just their joy and excitement for what's to come with the team. And Jake Richards, a guy who was on the team just last year and fully bought into this locker room and this roster. And I hope he's back, because I genuinely love Jake. He's a Philly guy too, grew up here and playing for his hometown team. That's got to be one of the coolest feelings for him. And then having DeLuca on the show with us, it really told me like at the end of the day, this locker room never lost each other. Like the players on that team care about each other. They want to play with one another, because when you go through a season like the Waterdogs did last year, and you go through a season like the Wings did last year, you get worried about, what was happening in that locker room. You don't really know. You're not going to get the full story. But to see that those guys truly like care about each other, they want to stick together, they want to win together, it really like reassured me that like at the end of the day, the players are good. Like they're as tight as can be. There's no animosity in that locker room. And I think now it's just on the coaching staff to really figure out the PLL game, because I have also, after last year ended, I was looking at it, and you look at the coaching staffs in the PLL and the teams that have been successful and the teams that have had just year over year success. They have either been together from the jump, or they have found a way to hire a former player that not only played professionally, but played in the PLL. You look at the Atlas, Stephen Brooks. You look at the Whipsnakes hiring Drew Snyder this year. You look at, just the guys that have come in, Kyle Hartzell with the Cannons. You've seen
Brody
these
Merrill.
teams, Brody Merrill being an assistant during Champ Series. Like, these teams have brought in guys who not only played professionally, but they played the PLL rules. And you've seen those units year over year kind of get better. They might have started slow, like the Cannons defense did this year. But again, that was 3 new guys playing with each other for the very first time. Kyle Hartzell really like got them going as the season went on. And then you look at like the Archers, where like that coaching staff has been together the entirety of the PLL. You look at what the Chaos had, and sure, did they win a lot of games? Was that because of the coaching staff? I don't necessarily think so. I think there was a lot of mitigating and underlying circumstances to Andy Towers' coaching record with the Chaos being what it was. They won a championship. They found ways to win in the playoffs when it matters. And at the end of the day, isn't that what sports fans clamor for? It's like championships matter the most. They won a championship. You look at just these teams and the coaching staffs that haven't had a lot of success and have had turnover. I think Chris Collins is a phenomenal defensive coordinator, phenomenal goalie coach for the Redwoods. I think John Grant Jr. is a phenomenal lacrosse mind, a phenomenal like person to have on a coaching staff. But when you watch the Redwoods play lacrosse, they're playing an MLL style of lacrosse that is so outdated and so slow and so just behind the 8 ball compared to a lot of the other offenses, that you look at the offense year over year since John Grant Jr.'s come in, Redwood's offense has not gotten any better. And this year it got really bad and really stagnant. And I'm not saying it's all his fault. The players got to play the games, but I think there's a lot of system in place there that is kind of holding back some of the talent on that roster from performing at a level that we could see them. You look at Atlas year 1, like Mike Pressler had to adjust and figure out the PLL game as a head coach. He's done just that. You look at the Waterdogs with Andy Copeland, brought in his staff. They found a way after the bubble, and the bubble is such a weird thing for an expansion team's first year to be in a COVID bubble. But after that, they were the number 1 seed in the PLL in 2021. They won the championship in 2022. They got back to the championship in 2023. Then you bring in Bill Tierney, who has collegiate coaching experience, but not PLL coaching experience, and they fall off a cliff. I think there's a lot of adapting and a lot of getting out of their own way that the Waterdogs coaching staff has to do in 2025 if they want to get back to being successful, because the players on that roster are too damn talented for that team to win 1 game in a season, win 2 games in a season. Like it just blew my mind that week over week over week, they just could not find a way to win.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to think that Bill Tierney is the level of coach that can figure it out in a very similar way to Mike Pressler, who it was in a very similar position because Ben Rubior had the Atlas as a very good, maybe not quite a championship contending team the way that the Waterdogs were, but they were a very, very high level team. And then that year one, it just dropped off. And being a Pressler guy, I felt like I was doing a lot of defending and being like, this is not the NCAA game, and he will adjust and adapt. And I'd like to think that Bill Tierney is of that level, and that he's smart enough to make corrections, whether that's bringing in some new people or making the changes himself. And like you said, getting out of his own way a bit. So I'm not super worried about them yet, but there is a level of, and again, maybe it's because I'm a Pressler guy, and I while I respect Bill Tierney, I've never been a fan of his teams or anything. So maybe there's a bit of my own kind of blinders on this situation, but there is a level of, I had a feeling Pressler could pull it off, and I don't know that Bill Tierney can pull it off. Again, I'd like to think that he is, but I'm less confident in that than I was about Mike Pressler figuring it out. So, I'm a little worried. I will say, this is stuck in my head since you said it, so I feel like I got to get it out. I agree with you about the Redwoods. I really like Chris Collins, and I think he doesn't get enough credit for how many times 100%. He's had to rebuild that defense. And while maybe they are not a number one or number two defense year in and year out, he constantly rebuilds them to be better than they probably should be. So I don't think he gets enough credit for that. I had him as one of the guys that I think could take that Atlas shot. I think Stephen Brooks is probably the guy that most people expect to be in that role. But if they're going to look somewhere else, I have him as a very high candidate for that job. I think he should get a serious look at that. But slightly controversial, I think. I think there might be some pushback here from people, maybe not from you, but from other people. I don't know that I think John Grant Jr. is a very good coach. He's certainly not been a very good offensive coordinator, and I think that's fine. I think people take that as like this big giant insult. But just because you're a great player, number one, doesn't mean you're a great coach.
Right.
Just because you're a great mind doesn't mean you're a great coach. And it could also be, he got the job at Lees McRae down in North Carolina. It could also be that maybe he's better suited to be a just an overall head coach or something more than just specifically focusing on the offense. Another thing, going back to Dylan Sheridan, he's an offensive coordinator, but his history has always been defense. Which I find really interesting. It feels almost, and again, you may know better than I do. I don't have any real connection to these guys, but it feels more like Dylan Sheridan is kind of Bill Tierney's guy, and it felt like he brought in his
for
guy.
More ways than one.
Yes, and it felt like he brought in his guy and put him in the opening that they had rather than getting him in the spot where he was going to be better suited. So maybe that's a way that they can, shift some things around. Maybe they don't. I don't know.
And that signing to me, like, yes, he's his guy, coached with him at Denver and everything, but like Dylan Sheridan is also Bill Tierney's son-in-law.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like Nepo hire in a sense. And I'm just like, was he the best suited guy for the job, or were you just kind of throwing, no pun intended, throwing a bone to your son-in-law to get this opportunity? And I don't know. I just, watching that offense last year and him being the offensive coordinator, it did not make a great first impression on him coming in as a younger guy too. And I think that's something I would love to see happen a lot more. We've seen it with the assistants kind of coming in that are former PLL players, seeing a bit more younger coaching come into the PLL game, which I would love to see, like Nat and afforded an opportunity if John Grant Jr. did ever step away to hire a younger offensive coordinator that played in his system or played in a system in the PLL to kind of bring a fresh perspective with Nat. Because I genuinely think Nat is one of the most valuable people in the PLL. I think he's a phenomenal leader of men, and that obviously comes from his military background first and foremost. I think he's a great coach. He's as a former athlete myself, Nat St. Laurent is a type of coach I would love to play for. I think he's a great coach. I also think he's a phenomenal GM. I think he is smart in figuring out what his team needs and when the prime opportunity to go and get it is. I think he's done a great job drafting, and I think he's also, his biggest downside is he's loyal to a fault, and he holds on to guys too long because he is loyal to them. And we started to see it in 2023 when that midfield started to get the younger guys integrated and everything. I want to see the young guys get that opportunity and just have the growing pains and go through it. And it's like, if you win, you win. If you lose, you lose. But at least you're showcasing like the guys that you are investing draft capital in and letting them play. Because whenever Cole Kirst was in the lineup, spark plug, unbelievable player for them. And people forget, when Nat drafted Cole Kirst in 2023, so many people shit on that pick. They were like, what is he doing? Why is he drafting Cole Kirst in the 3rd round? That's an undrafted type of player to sign. Cole Kirst has been fantastic, and he's an unbelievable guy in that locker room. You talk to anybody on that Redwoods team, the number one person they bring up as who's like the guy in the locker room, it's Cole Kirst, hands down. And I think the more we start to see, like, I would love to see Steve DiNapoli coach at some point. I think he would be a phenomenal assistant, very similar to like Stephen Brooks. I would love to see Brody Merrill get an opportunity to coach if he wanted to. But I think with the Waterdogs, it is one of those things that, being in press conferences with Bill Tierney last year, he was stubborn to a fault. Like it was my way or the highway type of situation. And a lot of people, throughout the whole run where they didn't have a face-off guy, if you listen to the opening press conference of the season at Media Day, Bill Tierney talked about how Alex Stathakis was finishing up his college degree, and Denver's on like one of those trimester type of situations where he was still in school finishing up, and once he was done getting his master's, he'd be playing. Now, do I think Bill Tierney should have said, okay, Stath is on the roster, look at the rest of the PLL teams, nobody's going to sign Alex Stathakis, I don't necessarily need to carry him on the roster, but I can afford to carry another face-off guy on my roster and dress a face-off guy. I think that stubbornness cost them both homecoming weekend games, and it cost them in the early go in that first game against the Archers, where they win those games. Who knows how your season progresses? And it's like, oh, we're sitting here with like 3-4 wins. Let's push for the playoffs now. And it's one of those things that I think he was just very stubborn to a fault. They didn't have Kenny Brower the entire season, and they drafted him, and he wasn't available due to injury. That's another piece that you're going to get this year. That's almost like a built-in draft pick to this draft class almost. And I think one of the best PLL debuts that we have seen, and it won't get talked about a lot because he's a defenseman, Marcus Hudgens' PLL debut was unbelievable, and I think he is so talented, fits this Waterdogs defense perfectly. And that was like, okay, Bill Tierney has an eye for talent, obviously, but does he have the knowledge to adapt that talent to the PLL rules and to the PLL flow of game and the pace of game? And do the assistants around him have the ability to say, hey, this isn't working, we need to fix something? Or do they also not recognize some of the pace and the flow of a PLL game yet, and you need to make a change? I'm willing to give this staff another year, because I know they said when Tierney was hired, it's a multi-year thing. But again, too, Bill Tierney is 72 years old. Like, how much longer does he want to be behind a bench and coaching? And that's no fault of his. Like, dude, you've done so much. And I know there's the narrative out there that the PLL is like trying to get him to win a professional championship to add to his resume and everything. I think Bill Tierney's just bored in retirement and wanted a chance to go and coach some of the guys he coached in college. And that was also the biggest red flag to me with this offense this year with the Waterdogs. I don't know if you picked up on it as the season progressed, and I don't know what happened. The fact that Ethan Walker had his worst season as a pro under his college coaching staff was alarming to me.
Yeah. Like you said, stubborn to a fault. We talked about Colin Farrell earlier. The fact that he was just sitting there all season.
Jake Naso was available.
Like, what are you talking about? And then I don't want to sound like I'm bashing Dylan Sheardon. From everything that I've heard, and I know people that have played for him, as you probably do, and as you said, at the end of the season, they didn't seem to have lost that locker room. I'm not saying that he's a bad coach or anything, but like you said, they clearly have some things to figure out. We have gone so much longer, like probably twice as long as I normally go in these. But I did want to do two last little things. One was to kind of circle back. So you are saying you would take CJ Kearse number one in your mind. How are you fitting that offense together, at least in year one and probably year two with Kieran signed through 2026, probably year two, unless, he just decides to call it quits. What are you doing with all the guys you listed off, and especially that Zed trade coming in and kind of seemingly filling that roster spot? Because I don't think anybody thinks Zed's running out of the box at all.
No. And I think you can do that. I think Zed's fully capable of doing that, and it gives you a different look. But I think the guys that you have run out of the box are in some degrees, and we've seen him do it when he was coming back from his concussions, is Michael Sowers. I think you can run him out of the box for different looks and have a different kind of style of offense out there when he does that. But I think you move Ethan Walker to running out of the box primarily. He did that in 2022 when the Waterdogs won the championship. He was primarily playing in the midfield, and with the departure due to retirement of Jake Carraway, that opens a spot there on the roster as a whole. And you trade Matt Brandow, who the moment they drafted him, I was like, that's an awesome pick. Like, great. He can score. Matt Brandow, in my opinion, was not ready for the PLL game the more and more I watched him. And I think he's going to a much better situation with the Whipsnakes for longevity for his career. And I think Zed Williams coming into this team is going to just take Michael Sowers and Kieran McCardle's game through the roof with the passing lanes that are going to open up between those three. And I think CJ is one of those guys who is pretty versatile, and you can kind of mold him to where you want him to fit in any given offensive possession. And he can do it. He's like an offensive Swiss Army knife, or as Andy Towers calls Ian McKay, Swiss Army machete. And you can utilize his skill sets in so many different ways. And for a guy like CJ, yes, he's going to go number one overall if the Waterdogs are smart, which I think they are when it comes to drafting. It's similar to Brennan, where like he doesn't have to be the guy. And it's a cool situation for him to start his pro career off where he doesn't have to be the guy. That pressure is off of him from the jump because you have so many talented veterans and so many young talent, so much young talent around him that he's going to be able to learn. And CJ Kearse doesn't have to be active every game day this year, which I think, yes, that sucks. Misses out on a paycheck, all that good stuff. But I think it's valuable for CJ to kind of just like learn the PLL game and watch it and digest it. And yes, he's had three brothers to learn from firsthand to do that. But I think it's also going to be super valuable for him to not necessarily be active every game day, because he doesn't have to be. But when he is active, his presence will be felt. And I think it's such a, like I said, it's an embarrassment of riches that, the Waterdogs finished so poorly with such a talented roster. It's not like they were a bad roster.
Yeah.
And now they get to add, the next one in CJ Kirst to this roster. And DJ gets mad every week that the Redwoods beat the Waterdogs in that game out in Denver, because CJ Kirst on the Redwoods would have been fantastic as well. But I think it's one of those things where, like, they don't have to force CJ Kirst into the lineup just because he's got the Kirst name, because he's the number one pick. They can kind of like develop him to get his skill sets ready for the PLL style and the speed of the game. And I think that's going to be so much more valuable for CJ's like longevity in the PLL, is him not necessarily having the weight of being active every week, being in a lineup and carrying a team. When you look at the Waterdogs roster right now, like, you're telling me on paper they can't win a championship in 2025? I think you're crazy if you don't think that. Like,
yeah,
top to bottom, that roster, outside of what Alex Stathakis is able to do, the rest of this NLL season to help his PLL face-off game, their roster is loaded top to bottom. And, they've got Dylan Ward in goal. They've got the goalie of the future right behind him in Matt DeLuca, who I think would start on an expansion team right now. I think this Waterdogs team's future is bright. The biggest question mark for me is the coaching staff and figuring out what they have planned for CJ and what they have planned for this roster that's here, and what they have planned for the rest of the draft to fill out a roster that is pretty loaded. And it's like, do they make every draft pick? Do they trade some of these picks away to get future capital for down the line when, your defense starts to get a little bit older than what it is right now? Those guys are still in their prime, but, Eli Gobrecht, Liam Burns, Chris Sabia, like, they're in their late 20s, early 30s. Like, how much longer can that core stay together before you have to start saying, okay, it's Kenny Brower time, it's Marcus Hudgens, who else do we add to this defense? When do we project that transition has to happen? Let's get a draft pick for that year and see what the defensive landscape looks like in 2027, 2028, and have it in our back pocket ready to go. So that way it's a smooth transition, just like what it will be with CJ Kirst inevitably when I think Kieran McCardle ends up hanging him up in, I don't know. I hope Kieran plays forever, but it's one of those things. You look, Kieran's, I think, 32. So does Kieran play for another 3-4 years, and then it's time for him to hang it up? We'll see. But I think CJ Kirst is not only a talent pick, it's a longevity pick for the future of the Waterdogs as a whole.
So that kind of leads me into the second part, which was not necessarily who specifically would you pick with the rest, but the Waterdogs have 3 of the first, is it 15 picks, I think?
I believe so. I'll check that right now, actually. Because they do have the first pick in round 1, and then they have a couple picks later. So they have the first pick in round 2, the 7th pick in round 2 from the Ryan Conrad trade.
Right. So it's 3 of the first 15 or 16 or whatever it is.
3 of the first 15.
And then they don't have they just swapped the 3rd rounder.
Yeah. So they have the Whipsnakes 3rd round pick. That is traditionally theirs, and the Whipsnakes still have 3 3rd round picks this year.
Yeah. There's lots of interesting draft. So again, not specifically names necessarily, because a lot of that is going to depend on who's still available. What would you do with those, especially those first 3 picks, but just kind of generally? It sounds like you would probably mostly be looking to move them on, especially like you said, you almost have a defense in waiting. You clearly have such a stacked roster that you were just talking about leaving CJ Kirst, the number 1 pick, off of the game day roster at points. What would you do with those picks?
I think you have to look at the midfield a little bit. Yes, you have Jack Hanna. Mm-hmm. Yes, I want to see Ethan Walker kind of be more of a hybrid midfielder attackman again. But you look at the midfield, like Zach Currier, he's still in his prime, obviously. Like, he's a staple of the roster. Connor Kelly just re-signed as well. He's 29. He's in his prime. I don't see the fit of Thomas McConvey on this roster, to be honest with you. I heard rumblings during the season last year that there were a couple teams looking to trade for him. I don't know if those talks ever, went any further than just like, hey, we like that guy. It wouldn't shock me if he potentially gets moved at some point this offseason. And, Mikey Schlosser's 29, but I think with injury history, he's more like 33. And that's no slight to Mikey. I love Mikey Schlosser, but, how long will those injuries, be able to stay off of him? That's your midfield depth right now for the Waterdogs. And I think that's your biggest question, is filling that midfield with some young talent. And, I think the Waterdogs defensive midfield unit is one of the best in the league. They still have to re-sign some guys that are free agents, but you look at a Matt Witcher, you look at Christian Scarpello, you look at Jake Richard, Jake Higgins, who missed a bunch of the season last year due to injury, and then Charlie Hayes. Like, I think they are a stacked unit in the short stick D midi unit. And then you have Rylan Reese, you have Chris Sabia as your LSMs, who I think are two of the best in the league as well. And then your defense, like we said, and, we didn't even bring up an AJ Mercurio. So, like, you have him in waiting as well. Ben Randall's a free agent. You see how that kind of plays out. And if you bring him back, I think you bring him back. I don't think you let an all-star and one of your best bright spots from last season walk out the door. I think that would be a mistake for sure. And then I genuinely think it's looking at the offensive midfield and figuring out what you want that position group to look like. Yes, it's led by Jack Hanna, Connor Kelly, Zach Currier. But outside of that, like, if somebody gets injured during the season, who do you have kind of behind them to step up and be part of this team? I think using 2 draft picks on like some like high powered, like offensive minded midfielders would be the smart route to go following the CJ Kurse pick.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's funny you start reading out those names and I'm like, man, I forget some of the guys that are on this roster and how stacked it is. And I mean, a lot of teams across the PL, I mean, there's probably a couple of exceptions, but a lot of teams are in that similar boat because there are so few teams and there are guys that, like you said, DeLuca would be a starter on an expansion team almost definitely, and I think you can look at most rosters have probably five to seven guys that would have an argument to be like, yeah, I would be a starter if there was an expansion team or two or whatever. And it's one of those complaints that we hear all the time about, oh, there needs to be more teams, and the money is what it is, and that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, you're reading through this roster and I'm like, yeah, gee, like there aren't holes really,
mm-hmm.
Like
I didn't even bring up Mikey Boehm is on this roster too.
Right. Like it's there are no holes to like plug. There's maybe some things where you think maybe we could be marginally better here or there, but it's not like but before the Zed trade, you might have said, hey, that left side over there is a hole that we can try to get maybe significantly better. Not that anyone that was playing in there was a bad player by any stretch, but as maybe but now with Zed, it's like who you got Matt DeLuca, who we're arguing is a starter on most teams, who's backing up Dylan Ward, who's arguably one of the best goalies in the world for the last 15 years. The defense you went through it's stacked. There's nobody there that you look at as a weak link. Midfield is probably the one spot, like you said, that you think could maybe get a slightly better, but it's
and not that you use a draft pick on it, but I would like to see them bring in because they didn't do this last year. It was just Stathakis in camp with them, and then they cut him, bring in competition for him during training camp.
Yeah.
That was my only
he's probably the one where you think maybe a hole, but like you said, we got very little of him last year, and the stuff that he's doing in the NLL indicates he should be the guy probably going into next season. But he's the only guy where you think, if they brought in a Connor Farrell or something, or maybe, I don't know, Jake Naso or someone. I don't know who's coming out this year. Fogo is always a position that's weird for me. I never know who's coming out when. But that's like the one position where you think, okay, maybe there's a chance to at least bring in competition, like you said, if not trying to actively find.
And you don't know what's going to happen with the chaos too, with whoever comes in as their new coaching staff. What they do with the roster, like they had James Riley in there when Nick Rowlett was injured. Like I look at it too. Like I like Nick Rowlett's game. I think it's cool that he plays with Jack, but Nick also is on the Philadelphia Wings roster. So like, does it make sense for the Waterdogs to sign him? And then Nick has the ability to say, okay, I can like kind of call Philadelphia home and settle somewhere for my own personal, just well-being. I think, that's going to be such an interesting situation this offseason, to seeing who ends up getting that coaching job in Carolina and what they decide to do with that roster, because it is very hodgepodge right now. You don't know a lot. And I think this was my own personal opinion on that situation too. And I know Inside Lacrosse had a great scoop on everything. I heard rumblings about the coaching turnover and everything with Andy Towers and his staff as well. I'm wondering if it was one of those things where, the Inside Lacrosse report said that, they wanted a change on offense. I'm wondering if the players were in agreement on that so that Josh Byrne didn't leave to go play MSL. Because Josh Byrne went on Back of the Bird and said one day he would like to play for a Man Cup. He sees his best friend Dane Smith go do it last year and get a bag, allegedly.
Allegedly.
Was that one of those moves to say, we can't afford to lose Dane Smith and Josh Byrne back-to-back off seasons. We need to make a change that caters to Josh's offensive talent and continue building around a Josh Byrne who is still in his prime. And yes, we have brought in a lot of new young offensive talent, but last year was not ideal for their offense whatsoever. And I'm wondering if that was the case, is like, we need to make a change now so we don't lose Josh Byrne indefinitely or forever.
Yeah. Look, man, I really appreciate, like I said, we've gone more than twice what I would normally do for a thing. And I absolutely believe you and I could just keep talking. Before we get out, I just wanted to say thank you personally. You have always been very open and welcoming, and anything that I needed, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, the run out would not be a thing if not for you. For years, like I said earlier, I did a podcast and I loved it and I had so much fun, and it kind of petered out. And pretty much since it ended, I was like, I want to do that again. And it wasn't until kind of meeting you and getting to talk to you and seeing what you're doing that I was like, okay, I don't have an excuse. Like, it was such an inspiration for me to see what you were doing and how well you were doing it, and the quality, the level at which you were doing it. Because that's another thing I'm always like, I don't ever want to be putting out anything that's like a low end product. Like I want to have nice mics and cameras, and like I want to be something that people look at and don't think that I'm just some dude in his basement, which I am, which I totally am, but I don't want it to feel that way. And you have been such an inspiration to me. And I thank you for coming on, and thank you again, especially for being that for me. And I look forward to, seeing you in Boston and anything else that we can do. I always enjoy talking to you. Again, we did 2 hours, and we could keep going all day probably. So
hey, I thank you for having me on. It was a blast. Anytime, I'm down to come on and chop it up. And that means a lot, as somebody who's not a traditional like lacrosse purist, lacrosse fan who got into the game in the late 2010s. Like that means a lot to show that, like, I have that impact, and from somebody who's been following lacrosse much longer than I have, that means a lot. So thank you, man, and keep doing what you're doing, because your show is awesome. And I mean, like, you got Kyle Harrison before us, so that's a testament to you. And I think your format of your show is something that the lacrosse community definitely needs. So keep doing what you're doing, and you always got us in your back pocket if you need us.
A huge thank you to Kyle for coming on the show today. Like I said there at the end, the Run Out would not exist if not for Kyle and his influence and expertise, and just being a sounding board for me to talk to. So I was really stoked to get him on the show. And thank you guys for tuning in and sticking around. I hope that you guys enjoyed the show. I hope you guys got something out of it. If you liked the show, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, review, all those things that you can do in whatever place you're listening or watching this podcast. It really does help the show grow more than I could explain to you. All right, I'll see you guys next week.